So lately we're having a different background every week. 2 weeks ago, last week, today I'm at home. There's construction in my office in the Koil, so today's Shiur is being recorded in my home. Wherever it is, same Torah, same Chedves D'Shmaitzel. So this week is Pashas Balak, and it is about Bilam. Bilam was the greatest specialist in his age, and he had a doctorate and a diploma on curses, on klolos. And whoever wanted to curse rented the services of Bilam Harasha. V'yotza l'kalel, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns all his klolos into brachas. And one of the brachas, B'fi Bilam, is the pasuk which hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Jews throughout the ages open their avodas yoim devar yoim biyoim oima toivu oyolecho Yankov mishkenoi secho Yisrael. And in Chazal we find different interpretations. Rashi brings two. Pischei Yisol she'enam mechuvonim zeh keneged zeh. Shiloi v'beis Eilomim, bote Hamikdash. But in Medrash we find number 3. Bikesh loy mishaloyu bote Haknesses bote Midrash shebi Yisrael. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu hoifech klora lebrocha. Ma toivu oyhalechu Yankov bote Haknesses mishkenesechu Yisrael bote Midrashos. So the topic today will be the similarity of Bais Haknesses and Bais Hamikdash. And this fundamental assumption is found twice in Chazal. In Megillah Avchov Tes, the Gemara explains a posting in the Novi Yecheskel. I think it's Perek Yud Aleph in Yecheskel. Ve'ehi lohem lemigdash ma'ad ba'arotzois asher ba'u sham. Kodesh Baruch Hu says, wherever they go in exile, in Golas, I will be there with them. And I will be there, Migdosh Ma'at, Elabot Haknesses, Elabot Midrashos Shebebavel. In Zohar Kodesh and Parshas Nosai, the Zohar goes even a step further, and the Zohar says, wherever Bnei Yisrael go into exile, the Shlit is with them. V'yosu li Migdosh v'shuchanti b'soicham. The mitzvah to say in Parshas Tum is not only the base of Migdosh, every base Knesses and every base Medrash is included in the mitzvah v'yosu li Hamikdash v'shuchanti b'soicham. Few times in Shas we find Bais Haknesses the shaf meduchtei, and Rashi explains when Jews went into exile in Golas Bavel, it started with Yechonyo HaMelech. Yechonyo took some of the Avnei Bais Hamikdash with him, and he built them into the shul in Bavel. That is based on the same idea. But the Haknesses about the Midrash Shebabavel have a nitzah, it's a spark of Kedushas HaKodesh VaHamikdash. Ve'ehi lohem lemigdash ma'at b'kol ha'rotzois asher ba'u sham. But this is not only Esgula. Today we will visit 15 sites, 15 different halachas, and I stress halachas, that we learn from the Bais Hamikdash. So let's embark on a short journey. Number 1, clearly based on the Zohar. Is there a mitzvah to say to build a Beis Knesses and Beit HaMidrash, or there's just hechsher mitzvah? Zdei Chemed Mareches HaKlolim Ois Beisim and Mem Daled. It's in the first volume in Zdei Chemed. Zdei Chemed brings many sources that building a shul, building a yeshiva is a mitzvah to say Shal Torah v'yosi l'mikdash v'shachanti v'soichem, and that is based on the Zohar that I quoted just a moment ago. He brings other sources. It's only a hechsher mitzvah. If you need to daven with a minyan, you need a place the minyan should come together. And if there's an inyan in Talmud Torah the Rabbim, we need a place where people will come together to learn Torah. And those about the Haknesses, about the Midrashos. But as Zdei Chemed does bring many sources, it's not only hechsher mitzvah. Mitzvah to say v'yosi li migdash v'shuchanti b'soicham. Moira Migdash, es Migdashai tira'u. And Chazal go into great detail. how a person is supposed to conduct his activities, his affairs, when he goes into Bais, when he goes into the Azorah. Moira Hamikdash. Two of the Bali Atoises that wrote Sifrei Mitzvahs, Rabbi Loza Memetz, Rabbi Yitzchok Mikurbil, Smak, Mitzvah Vav, Sefer Yerei Mitzvah Tov Tes. They both say Moira Hamikdash, Min Torah applies to both the Knesses and both the Midrashos. And the various halachas that we find in Hilchas Beis Haknesses. The primary source is Megillah, Chavhei, Chavav. What are we allowed to do in a Beis Knesses? What is prohibited to do in a Beis Medrash? Those are Min Torah, Moira Hamikdash. Most poskim don't agree, and according to most poskim, it's midrabanan. But nevertheless, according to some Rishonim, Moira Hamikdash, Ves Mikdushay Torah applies to both the Knesses as well. Lo yisasum kein l'Shem Elokeichem, es mizbechoseim titoitzun, ashereim tigadeun, psilei Eloheihem tisrufun be'eish, lo yisasum kein l'Shem Elokeichem. So the Rambam writes in Mishnah Torah, Hilchas Yesod Torah, if one destroys any part of the Mizbeach, the Azorah, the Heichel, the Beis Hamikdash, that is a lavdi uraisa lo yisasun kein l'Shem Elokeichem. This is an interesting phenomenon. I don't remember anywhere else. And many times when I see in a shiur, I don't recall anywhere else. I don't mean to say that there is no anywhere else. One's memory is extremely limited, and mine as well. But I do not recall any other similar source, and this is fascinating. The Rambam relates to Taryag Mitzvah Shabbat 3 times in his monumental Svarim. First of all, the Mishnah Torah. The Mishnah Torah is the crown jewel of the Rambam's writings. The Mishnah Torah gives us all the halachas a Jew needs to know. Ad kedei kach, the Rambam maintained, and he hoped, the Rambam writes in his Ekdama, all we need to learn is Chumash, Nevi'im, and Mishnah Torah. Everything is a Mishnah Torah. But the Mishnah Torah is structured in a way to cover Taryag mitzvahs. And in every section of the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam starts off, which are the mitzvahs, bein mitzvahs aseh, bein mitzvahs lo taseh, that are elaborated in this section. So the Mishnah Torah is the lengthiest version of Taryag mitzvahs. Sefer mitzvahs is very abbreviated, it's very short. Minyan mitzvahs is the shortest version. Most mitzvahs have one line, a half a line, a few words. In this sugya, we find the halacha in Minyan mitzvahs that is not found in Sefer mitzvahs, and not even in Mishnah Torah. So a Mishnah Torah, Perek Vav Yesod Torah, the Rambam gives us all the halachas and the details of Lo Yisasum Kein l'Shem Elokeichem, and the Rambam deals only with the Beis Hamikdash. Sefer mitzvahs Lo Taseh Samachei. The Rambam writes, Heichel, the Azorah, the Heichel, v'hadoim Elohem. Sosem v'lo perish. What is included in hadoim Elohem? We don't know. Minyan mitzvahs, hakotza, the shortest version. The Rambam clearly writes, if one destroys any chedek of the Beis Hamikdash or both the Knesses or both the Midrashos, he is over belav. And that's a chiddush. Some soifer chedek vav in the tshuva siman ches. Mavliya betoich dvorav, kemilza de pshita. That if you destroy any section, any part of a shul, your oivan lo yisasum kein. Doesn't bring a source, but he has a source in Minyan HaMitzvahs of the Rambam. Lo yisasum samechei. Our next stop brings us back to the Yereim. Rabbi Loza Memetz, Mitzvah Kuv Daled. The Rambam writes a gewaldige chiddush. Kishem she'osem min haTorah lehenois mebeis hamikdash min ha'hekdesh v'kol ha'nehenim min ha'hekdesh oiva b'me'ila kach gam bot ha'knesses v'bot ha'midrashos. Because the Beis Knesses is like the Beis Mikdash. Ha'nehenim min ha'hekdesh moyel. Does the Yereim mean that if a person has benefit, hanoah, from a Beis Knesses or a Beis Mikdash, moyel behekdesh? Of course not. Does he need to bring a korban, a shal me'ilos, kerem v'choimish? When a person is moil hegdish, the hegdish is yoitzel chulin. So if a person eats in a Bais Knesses, will the Bais Knesses no longer be a Bais Knesses? It's ridiculous. What the Areya means is not me'ila mamish. Rashi and Tosfos write many times in Shas, Kudashim kalam ein behem me'ila, aval yesh behem misa diuraisa. Kudashim kalam don't have dinei me'ila, but they do have isur me'ila. And that is the way we need to understand the Arayim. Bais Knesses is not Hagdish. In some ways, it's similar to Hagdish, like Kodeshim Kalim. But the Arayim does say, Anahenim and Hagdish oive be'isa diuraisa, like Bais Hamikdash. So the first four sources deal with Kedushas Bais Knesses, Ketzad noyagim boy, mitzvahs b'niyosoi. Source number 5 is very different, and we're dealing with monetary issues. Similarity brings the agudo. Everybody remembers Elu Mitzias. You find money in a Bais Knesses, harei elu shaloi, because it's a mokem rabim, and people are misyayish, and it's kesef. Money is a davar she'en bo siman. Sefer Aguda asks, but why isn't the shul zoicha b'kinyan chotzor? His teretz, Bais Knesses is like Hegdish. Hegdish doesn't have kinyan chosser, neither does a shul. And the Ktsaisa Koishon is marach. He disagrees with the Sefer Aguda. The basic assumption that Hegdish doesn't have kinyan chosser is a machlokes Rashbam and Tosfos and Bavasa ayin tet. But in this shiur, we won't go into many details because we have 15 stops on our way. The next 4 or 5 sources have something in common. Halachas in the tzura of a Bais Knesses. They also are based on the similarity between Bais Knesses and Bais Hamikdash. Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim, Kuf Nun Aleph, Sif Yud Beis, the last Sif in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Kuf Nun Aleph. Shulchan Aruch is mesupak. Whether one could be mishtamish ba'aliyos Beis HaKnesses, the balcony of a Beis Knesses. I'm not dealing with the Ezras Noshim. That's a separate question we won't discuss today. The balcony. Shulchan Aruch doesn't explain what's the suffix, but the Beis Yosef does, and he quotes the Mordechai. Aliyas ba'azora lo niskachu, aliyas shebaheichal ken niskachu. Kedushas Bais Knesses is the kedusha of the heichal or kedusha of the azora. Let me explain. The Bais Hamikdash fundamentally has 4 different sections, 4 different levels of kedusha. Kodesh HaKodeshim, the holiest of holies. Once a year, only the Kohen Gadol could enter. And the Yerushalmi says a few different sources, even a malach, an angel, cannot go into the Kodesh Kodesh. Heichal, that is the Ikar Mukam Avoida. Most of the Avoidas. 3 Kerem are in the Heichal. Menorah Shulchan, and in the middle, Mizbach HaKtoides. And then the Azora. The Azora is divided into different sections. But fundamentally, the Azora, that is where Mizbeach HaChitzon stands, Shnei Tmidim B'Kol Yoim, and all the other Karbonis. And then Harabayas. Bais Knesses definitely is not the same as Kodesh HaKodeshim or Harabayas. It's not Kodesh HaKodeshim. But neither is it Harabayas because there are no avoidus in Harabayas. The reason a Bais Knesses is like a Bais Hamikdash is because of Karbonis. Karbonis keneged Karbonis tiklum. Brachas Chavav. Maybe K'toides Shebeheichel. Tikun Tfilosi K'toides Lefonecho Masas Kapei Min Chazorev. And therefore the Mordechai is Mesipik, quoted in the Bais Yosef, reflected in the Shulchan Aruch, is a Bais Knesses like the Heichel, V'aliyas Ken Iskachu, or like Azora, V'aliyas Loin Iskachu. So we find a Sofik and Shulchan Aruch, Kedushas Bais Knesses, Heichel, or maybe Azora. And this brings us to a fascinating source number 7. Tshuvas Chasam Sofer Achaim Siman Chof Ches, and the Tshuvas Mirchtav Sofer, his great son Reb Shimon Sofer, the Rav of Krakow, Chelik Bais, Siman Aleph. We will start with a Michtav Sofer, but just a brief historical overview. The Jewish reform movement started more than 250 years ago with Moshe Mendelssohn that wrote the Biur on Chumash. In the days of the Noida B'Yehuda, the Noida B'Yehuda was one of the first to see the danger in the various reform and Haskalah movements and waged war against them. The Chassam Sofer followed in his footsteps with Aaron, Churin, and others. But the total war broke out in the generation of Talmidei Chassam Sofer. And that is when the Yereim and the Meskilim fought over every kehillah, every town, and every city in Hungary. And that was the age of Reb Shimon Sofer and Michtav Sofer. And the very first changes that were initiated were in the shuls. So Reb Shimon Sofer has an amazing tshuva in which he tries to explain that the classical structure of a shul is based on the similarity between every Bais Haknesses and the Bais Hamikdash. The Aron HaKodesh is keneged Kodesh HaKodeshim. What was in Kodesh HaKodeshim? The Aron, Luches Abris, and a Sefer Torah. Nothing else. That's the Aron Kodesh. The Aron Kodesh is not a machzan. All we have in there are Sifrei Torah. And that is why the minhag is to have a paroiches before the Aron Kodesh. Why isn't it not enough to have a beautiful door? Because the paroiches separated the Kodesh HaKodeshim from the Heichal. So the Aron Kodesh is Kodesh HaKodeshim. Omedat Tefillah of the Chazan should be close to the Aron Kodesh because that is the Mizbeach HaPnimi, Tikoin Tfilosi Ktores Lefonecha. The bima in the center of the shul is keneged Mizbeach HaChitzoin Sheba Azora. And why is that? Because the Gemara at the end of Megillah, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu shows Avraham Avinu every generation to come, Avraham Avinu is shocked and he cries out, Kolzman Shebeis Hamikdash Oyakayim, if my children will transgress, they'll do sins, maybe Korban v'miskapeloi. What will they do after Churban Beis Hamikdash when there no longer will be Korbanos? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I thought about it, Avram. Do you think I didn't think about it? Kvar tikanti lem seder kriya. Ubiyamei hamoed, they'll come together and they'll read Parshas HaKorbanos. V'maleni aleim kilu akrivu korban. So the bima, where they learn in the Torah, is associated with Korbanos, and that's the Mizbeach HaChitzoin. And that is why the minhag is to have an elevated bima. You walk up to the bima to Kriyas HaTorah. Mizbeach HaChitzon, there was a kevesh, and the kohen walked up to be makrev korbanos. That's an amazing insight, and therefore Reb Shimon Sofer says we cannot change anything. Kekutzei shel Yud. This is all beruach HaKodesh. We find the same fundamental idea in the Chassam Sofer, but a contradiction between the two. So the Chassam Sofer doesn't deal with the overall structure and planning. But he does deal with the question, there were some that wanted to change the bima. Instead of in the center of the shul, moving it up, moving it down, and the Chassam Sofer says no. Because the bima is keneged Mizbach HaPnimi, Mizbach HaKtoris, and that was in the center. Shulchan Medorim, Menorah Bedorim, Shulchan Betzafon, and the Mizbeach in the middle, and that's why the bima needs to be in the middle. So the Chassam Sofer says the bima is keneged Mizbeach HaPnimi, while Reb Shimon Sofer says the bima is keneged Mizbeach HaChitzon. And the Amud HaTfilah is Mizbeach HaPnimi. And I think these two interpretations depend on the previous source, the Mordechai and the Bais Yosef. If a Bais Medish, if a Bais Knesses has Kedushas HaHeichel, then obviously the bima is in the center. That's the Mizbeach HaPnimi. But if a shul is like the Azora, makes more sense Reb Shimon Sofer's approach. Aron HaKodesh, Kodesh HaKodeshim, Amud HaTfilah, Mizbeach HaPnimi, Somach Loi, But the overall shul is based on the Azorah, and that is why the Bima is the Mizbeach HaChitzoin. 3 more halachas that deal with the structure, the planning of a Beis Medrash based on Beis Mikdash. Kuf Nun Sif Hey, Shulchan says the entrance, the door entering a Beis Knesset should be across against the Yoran Kodesh. Because Pesach HaHeichel was Tzad Mizrach, Mul Kodesh HaKodeshim B'Tzad Marav. So this is Sifin Shulchan which we learn from Beis Hamikdash. The Bachan Siman Tzaddik says that the minig is to have a pulish before the shul, which means a room before you actually walk in from the street to the sanctuary, to Mokoim HaTfilah. The Bach bases this Chiddush on Yerushalmi, Brochas Lamed Zayin Amid Bais. The Yerushalmi says that La'olim Yekon Asodem Shnei Dalsois. So most other poskim say Shnei Dalsois is you walk in 4 amis, 8 amis. Don't stand next to the door, because then it seems as if you're just waiting to get out. But the Bach's interpretation, Shnei Dalsois Kipshutom, 2 doors. 1 door to get into the Pulish, and the other door actually to get into the shul, Mokoyim HaTfilah. So once again, the Bach says, what is the fundamental source? The Ulam was before the Heichal. So the Bach's interpretation once again assumes that the shul is keneged the Heichal, and the first room is keneged HaAzorah, the Ulam Shaya Samuch LeHeichal. Kuf Nun Siv Bais. And we learn this in the Gemara Masechet Megillah. Shul should be the highest structure in town. Today it's impossible. Hundreds of shuls, especially in Israel, are in basements. But even the big ones can't compare with skyscrapers. Even in Yerushalayim, we have buildings that are more than 25 stories high. In many cities in the world, we have buildings that are more than 100 stories high. No shul could have that size and that height. But b'yamei Chazal or b'yamei Shulchan Aruch, the shul was the highest structure in town. And why is that? Ezra Sofer and Pele Gimel, when he gathers the remnants in Golas Bavel and they come to Yerushalayim to build the Beis Hamikdash, L'roi meim Beis Elokeinu. And therefore, shuls similar to the Beis Mikdash should be the highest in town. Number 10, Shulchan Aruch Kuf Nun Gimel. Loisave esnan zayna umechir kelev Beis Hashem Elokecha. The same applies to a shul. And we should not build a shul from esnan zayna umechir kelev. Where does the minig come from to light candles in Beis Medrash? It is brought in Shulchan Aruch, Kuf Nun Aleph Sif Tes. The source is the Kolboy, because that's what they did in the Beis Hamikdash. And the Mishnah Berurah Sif Kot Chov Zayin writes we should light the candles before people arrive in shul, because that is what they did in the Beis Hamikdash. Could we have non-Jews participate in building our shuls? Throughout the ages, it happened many times. The non-Jews wanted to take part and to donate to build shuls. Shalas Yeshuvas Yad Yitzchak, I'm an Einikel of the Yad Yitzchak. He was told Shavarov, one of the greatest Gedolim in Hungary. And in Yad Yitzchak we find, Chele Gimel Siman Reisha and Aleph, an interesting story, that the mayor in town, or the governor, one of the important dignitaries, a non-Jew, wanted to donate a Sefer Torah to the Jewish shul. And the told Shavarov, Rabbi Avram Yitzchak Lik, the Yad Yitzchak says, yes, we could take from him. But maybe that is only a Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah might be a bigger chiddush than just building the shul. Tshuras Shai, Ben Doiroi Ben Giloi of the Yad Yitzchak, Chelak Aleph Siman Tes Vav, deals with non-Jews that wanted to help in building the shul, and he says it's okay, based on Erech and Davav. Erech and Davav, we find that a non-Jew could donate a menorah, a candelabra, or other parts to beautify our shuls. But two Gedolim, Talmidav Shalachsam Soifer, paskin differently. Zichron Yehuda, Reb Yehuda Greenwald, was a Talmud of the Ksav Soifer in Simenun Vav. Shvilei David was a Talmud of, I think, the Imrei Eish, Maharam Ash. Shvilei David Yorodei Simen Reish Nun Daled. They say, you could take money to build a shul, but you can't have non-Jews actually build a shul. And why not? Ezra Soifer Perek Daled. When Ezra comes to Yerushalayim to build the second Beis Hamikdash, and some of the non-Jewish leaders wanted to help him, he says, Lo elochem velonu livnois bayis le'elokeinu. Leave it up to us. We will do it on our own. So the Shvilei David, Reb David Zilberstein, Zichron Yehuda, Reb Yehuda Greenwald say shuls are like Beis Hamikdash, like Ezra Soifer said, Lo elochem velonu livnois bayis le'elokeinu. But I wonder, both these great Gedolim were Talmid of Shalach Sam Soifer, and they weren't aware of the Sam Soifer's tshuva. Yoredei Reish Chofei, and the Sam Soifer clearly says, Beis Knesses does not have the same din as a Beis Medrash, as Beis Hamikdash. And even though Ezra Soifer said, Lo elochem velonu livnei bayis le'elokeinu, but the Gemara in Erechem proves shul is different. Another interesting topic. Could we plant trees in the chutzner of a Beis Knesses? Well, the Torah says, Lo yisita lachu asher beis etzel mizbach Hashem Elokecho. Rebbe Kiva Eiger. Hagos in Shulchan Aruch Kufra Aleph quotes Perush Reb David Arama al Rambam. Same rule applies to shuls, and one should not plant trees in the yard, in the garden, Chatzal Beis Haknesses. Tshuvas Maram Shik, Ayin Chet, Ayin Tes Orachaim. The Maram Shik is very machmir, and he writes that as Mina Kol Beis Yisrael. And even if the trees were already planted b'shoigeg with no bad intentions, and the Gabonim don't agree to take them out, we should send someone in the middle of the night to uproot those trees. Nobody likes vandalism today, but the Maram Shik paskins, if they refuse to take out those trees, we should do so, because one should not plant trees b'chatzar Beis Knesses. A contemporary of the Maram Shik, one of the great Gedolim of his time, was the Binyan Sion, the Oroch Lener of Yankov Ettlinger. And in Tshuvas Binyan Sion Simentet, he describes a situation in which the shul was bursting by its seams. The community grew, and there was a need to add on and make the shul bigger. So they bought a house next to the shul. They ripped down the house, and they made the shul twice the size. But that house had some fruit trees in the garden, and now those fruit trees are outside the Beis Knesses. So the Aruch HaShulchan was asked, could we uproot an eitz pri, which is loy ta'ashchis, in order there should be no trees in the chutzner of the Beis Knesses? And the Binyan Sion responds, regardless of whether those trees bear fruit or not, I never heard of a minig not to plant trees next to a shul. And the Ochner writes, I don't know any source to this minhag. Obviously, he didn't see Rebbe Kiva Eiger and Reb David Arama al Rambam. So the Maram Shik is very machmir, and the Aruch HaShulchan and the Oroch Lener and Binyan Sion is not machmir at all, and he says this minig has no source. Number 15 on my list brings us all the way back to number 1, and that is why I left it to the end of this year. We make a hadron. When we're Messiah, we go back to Dav Bais. Shalas Atshuvas Mas Avrom, Rabbi Avrom Ashkenazi. He was a Chover Beis Din Shel Reb Chaim Palagi in Turkey, in Izmir, I think. And he writes that one should build a shul only with Jewish workers. Because Rashi writes, V'yosili Hamikdash v'osili lishmi. You need kavonas lishma when you build a Beis Hamikdash, and the same when you build a shul. It must be l'shem shemayim. So how could you build a shul with non-Jewish workers? Wow, that's quite a chumrah. I'm afraid if we would adopt this minhag as a soul, we would have no shuls. Where do you find Jews that are willing to stand on the scaffolds and build? Jews are perfect as eitzegabers, to give eitzes, to give commands. Jews don't like to work. So the Mas Avram alone, even in his age, going all the way back 170 years to Turkey, he says, "B'mokum de efshar." If we have no Jewish workers, of course we should build shuls with non-Jewish workers. But if you could have Jewish workers, it's an avera gedola to have non-Jews build your shuls, and that's a big chiddush. 15 sources, halachadika sources, different halachas in many areas that are based on the fundamental assumption that every Beis Knesses, every Beis Megdash is a Migdash Ma'at. And we find many sources that the Chazan is like the Kohen that's Makrav Karbonos Al Gabe Mizbeach. And Tfilos Keneged Karbonos Tiknum, as we learn in Brochos Chavav. And the Shulchan Aruch says in Hilchos Tefillah, Machshava Paseles Bekochim Bekarbonos, Tfilos Keneged Karbonos. How important it is to have Karbonos at Tefillah. So what we saw in today's shiur is every shul has Shechina. Ve'ehi lohem lemigdash ma'ad ba'arotzos asher ba'u sham. There are many levels of Shechina and many different aspects of Shechina. But the most central Shechina is definitely in Beis Hamikdash, because that is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises, Va'osi li Hamikdash v'shuchanti b'soicham. But Chazal also say, Kol be'asor shchinte sharia. Whenever you have a minyan that gets together and we say, Dovish shebekdusha, that is Shechina. Chazal also say in Mavis, in Ovis, and a Soiti of Zayin, the Gemara says, Ish ve'ishu shezachu shchina shriya beinayim. It's not only shuls, it's not only yeshivas, it's not only where we learn Torah. Man and woman, husband and wife, if they have a house of kedusha, of tahara, of tznius, they are also zoicha to Ashos Shechina in their private home. So there are many levels of kedusha. But the greatest Shechina is Beis Hamikdash, v'yosi li Mikdash, v'shuchanti b'soicham. And the closest to the Beis Hamikdash are Mikdashei Ma'at, both Haknesses and both Midrashos. I think that is the idea of Yechonya. Various sources in Shas we find. Beis Haknesses the Shaf Meduchte, and Rashi explains, when Yechonya goes into exile with his brethren, with the Jewish people, he takes along bricks, stones from the Beis Hamikdash, to build them in a shul in Bavel. Because every Beis Haknesses should be Bavel. V'kal v'choyim b'Eretz Yisrael is a Mikdash Ma'at. Rashi says in Shabbos Nun Hey, Ashos Shechina didn't start with the Beis Hamikdash, and it didn't end with Churban Bais. Ad sheloi nivna oyel moed oiso Shechina shoyra be'ohalei tzadikim. I explained many times what Rashi brings. V'yeveyehu Yitzchak o oyhalo. During the lifetime of Sora Imenu, 3 miraculous things, miraculous phenomena were in oil Sora. Onan kosher ala oil, ner doileg brocha metzuye bepas. And these vanished when Sora passed away. And they were restored miraculously when Rivka comes. What do these 3 indicate? Shloshes ele keneged ma. Torah avoide gemilas chosodim? No. 3 klei avoide shebeheichal. Brocha metzuye bepas. Keneged lechem aponim. Ner doile keneged amenoira. Onan kosher alo oil ki ba onan eroa el hakepoiris. And that is anan haktoiris. Ad sheloi nivna oil moyed hoisa shchina shoyre ba oale tzadikim vitzad koni yois. And the same after the Beis Mikdash was destroyed. The Shechina goes into Golus, And where does it go? Ish ve'isha shezachu, ohalei tzadikim, afilu echad sheyoshev yoseg b'Torah. But primarily, bote knesios ubote midrashos. So how precious are our shuls, our yeshivas, how precious they should be, and how much we should cherish them. In other Beis Hamikdash Ma'at, and another one, and another one, another Jewish home, another shul, another yeshiva. Ad sheyala rotzon lefonav yisborach shemoy, to build a Beis Hamikdash b'Yerushalayim, bebias goyel tzedek, ubebinyan Beis Hamikdash b'mehero v'yomeinu amen.